want to get into other names that we're being linked with. And I know you're going to really enjoy this next story because he's one of your favorite footballers in the world, which is a slow dawning revelation to me. But we are being linked this week, and you've put in the title, and someone's already quizzed me up on whether or not it's relevant, because the player, Xavi Simons, has recently made a move from PSG for a big transfer fee. And yet he is the one, outside of some of the ones that you've mentioned there, he is the one that has been mentioned again and again and again with Liverpool. And it's very interesting. It won't go away. And you've got as well an under the radar winger for us from Spain. So talk to us about both of these, starting with Xavi Simons and why he's just not your favorite player.
To be honest, I've been reluctant to dig on this because, you know, when you don't want to discover something potentially that you don't want to hear. So I've tried to stay away from digging, but it's become a name recently that you just can't stay away from because it's been mentioned a lot. So you've got to, you know, we do what we do and asking around. The big thing with this is most journalists are in on this. David Ornstein's mentioned it with the link before to Liverpool. We did Media Matters earlier with David Lynch, and he was like, yeah, his info, absolutely, Liverpool are having a good look at this player. So those are two parts to mention. The PSG, I've seen people mentioning this. They've only just signed him. We mentioned this last summer. They signed him on a 2.5-year deal, which was the strangest thing ever. Basically, they were fattening up the pig for Christmas, weren't they, Red Bull? They knew exactly what they were doing. He's got 2 years left to go. The sale's happening, whether it's Liverpool or someone else. That's pretty unanimous across all journalists. It was a fattening him up for this, basically. Now, I don't want the info that I'm getting. And in fact, I was just tempted when I read it just to switch my phone off a little bit. But the extra info we've got on this is Liverpool really like this player, Trev. Absolutely, from multiple sources. Not only this, I don't even like saying this. I feel dirty almost talking about this, but they like him in terms of the fact he could play the 10, you know, the attacking midfielder. And Trev, which you're definitely not going to like, he's also played a good part of the season at left wing for Red Bull Leipzig as well, or on the left side. So he has that famous word, versatility. They really like that. Brilliant mates with Cody Gakpo, knows all the Dutch boys. Where's our manager from again? All the things we do not want to hear. And even the other bit that I got today, literally, which I know I shared with you and I don't really want to share wider, is they like the idea of he could play the 10 and you could then drop Szoboszlai potentially down to the 8, or you've got that midfield rotational options. Even though he's not the name, he's not the midfielder I want. He definitely isn't the left winger I want. He's not even close. But we've got to be honest, and this doesn't mean he's a terrible player. He's a Marmite player for me. But Xavi Simons and Liverpool is a red-hot, solid link from all the info we've got.
And so we can't ignore it. And, you know, when you're hearing that name again and again from all these various people that you talk to, invariably there's something in it, Dave, and it's one of those ones that people are going to have to get their heads around. And I think, just glancing at the comments here, there are not too many people who disagree with you, and there are one or two who are piping up in his favor. So listen, it's an interesting one. I can't claim to be an expert on Xavi Simons at all. I've seen him a few times. I was really looking forward to seeing him because he was really hyped up to me by a pal of mine, and I watched the game and there was a massive amount of underwhelm. But that's one or two performances. I'm not a player judge. So it's interesting. However, there is a young Spanish lad that you wanted to mention here, which is a kind of an unusual link from Betis.
Sometimes when we get a name, as you know, our first question is like, who? What? Where? Followed by various other things. And it might just have broken my PC there to look at him. But Jesus Rodriguez, Betis youngster, left wing, right-footed, Spanish under-21 international. I'm going to be honest on this. He could walk past us in the street, Trev, couldn't he? And we'd have no idea who he is. I can't ever say I've seen him, know too much about him, bar what we've been told. But left winger, right-footed. Main attribute we've got, one-on-one duels, speed and progressing the ball that way. Really, really seen as a star at that level. The club have watched him quite a bit and are keeping a serious eye on him. I suppose the only thing which I'm struggling with a bit is if you look at what we've got now with Gakpo and Diaz. Yes, we suspect Diaz is going. I think, the world and his wife thinks Luis Diaz will depart this summer. The only question is, where does he fit in? And is he good enough to come in and, play in that senior team straight away? It just seems as though, and I might be wrong because I've never seen the kid and someone's going to tell me he's a world beater in the chat panel. The profile, put it this way, I think he's got 4 goals and 3 assists this season for Betis. He's played quite a few games at the Betis junior level as well before he stepped up, but he is light. But it would be... It's potential, I get. It sounds like it's potential. But if Simmons was underwhelming, I'm not sure what people would think if it was Jesus Rodriguez coming in to play on our left wing, put it that way.
Yeah. I noticed somebody saying something about how we're very strong in the winger department and we have re-signed our right winger. Maybe we've often talked about it with a view to him drifting central, but probably not immediately. But it is that left side that we're worried about because whoever stole Cody Gakpo and left back, a lad that looks like Cody Gakpo, has done a real number on us in recent weeks. Since he's come back, he's been just a shadow of himself. And, fair enough. People do their own stories about how it takes time and so on and so forth. And Luis Diaz, whereas he's all bustle and hustle and huff and puff and very lively, for example, at the weekend there, got his goal. I think everybody knows it doesn't really matter whether you're really high on Luis Diaz or not. Luis Diaz will walk out the door to Barcelona tomorrow if they open it. Luis Diaz, if he doesn't get offered the contract that he wants at Liverpool, and that's an issue upcoming, will take the Saudi bag before, settling for less money at Liverpool. And why the hell wouldn't he? It's entirely up to him to do what he wants to do with his career. So I think that's why people are worried about the winger situation, especially on that left flank. We do, however, desperately need a striker. We saw the latest episode of Diogo Jota can't do Diogo Jota things at the weekend. We saw the other lad, Darwin Núñez, up in the stand, apparently sick, but grand, sitting in the ill. You dropped an absolute clanger in my head last week with the story about Darwin and Victor Osimhen, and the how close that came on this show just last week. We were talking about that. So regardless, one of those two guys is going to go. I wouldn't be surprised if both of them go. Yeah. And if that is the case, I only say that because I think people would still pay big money for Jota, and people would still pay big money for Núñez. Who those people are, that's for another show, a different time. But we are being linked with strikers because we're going to need a striker. And even if we kept the current strikers, we still need a striker because they're not doing striker things. No. And the one that you've got up for discussion this evening, we did the Victor Osimhen chat last week, and it was kind of exciting, and we went through his numbers, and they're really good. But this Ekitike guy is starting to seem like it might be a little bit more than Twitter talk. What's going on there?
Yeah, it was when we kind of mentioned him, we weren't discounting him, but it's fair to say that all the info we were getting, all the noise was from his agents. It was like, whenever there's usually agent talk, this isn't normally how Liverpool works. You wonder if it's just a smokescreen or trying to drum up the interest. But digging further on it, yeah, there's quite a few people saying Liverpool are having a real look, have spoken to his reps. And just at this moment in time, I mean, he scored. It was a weird game because he played against Spurs in midweek, didn't he, Thursday? And he scored the goal, a really good goal. So that's the best way to drive the headlines. And it was just surreal, Trev, because sometimes his link-up play was nice and he was quick. There was no doubts about that. But at times, he couldn't trap a bag of cement and he just couldn't pass it to a teammate. And it was like, this is just Darwin Núñez Mark II a little bit as well, maybe being a bit harsh there. But again, plays for Frankfurt this weekend, again, gets a goal and assist. So his numbers are really ratcheting up that way. And you just honestly start to wonder a little bit of like, what names are out there? Who's realistic? Because we are starting to knock a few. I mean, Isak, Newcastle look like they're going to get the Champions League, isn't it? So, you know, there's things you can start deleting. You see who's reasonable, who's capable of leading this line, who's got real potential or ability right now. And it's important to say as well, Liverpool aren't going to put a project number 9 in there. You don't have a project leading the line for the champions. That is not how it works. They've got to be of a certain caliber as well. This 22-year-old is, as it says there, lighting up the Bundesliga at the moment. There's a lot of rawness, but for the right price, it does feel a little bit like a Liverpool signing, doesn't it? And for all the players we've talked about and the things we want more pace in the line. This guy's rapid. And a lot of the people who say that we've talked to and really trying to dig this out, aside from the agent, are coming back and saying, yeah, Liverpool have got real interest in Ekitike. So we've got to tell you that. We'll see what it brings.
So, like, there's quite the array of names now. We've had some really high-profile ones. We have the ones that you and I would love to be talking about, but there's nothing new on them, including the likes of Victor Osimhen, Julian Alvarez, people like that we were linked with in the past. But the one that's there all the way through ticking along is Ekitike. So let's just see how that goes. Someone suggesting Delap along with Ekitike there in the comments. And by the way, folks, I can't help but just notice this when you're throwing out a name and saying, "Hey, come on," that kind of attitude. These aren't our ideas. These are stories that Dave has got from various sources. We're not suggesting them. We're not putting them forward. If you wanted me and Dave to put forward our favorite players, that's a whole different show. And maybe we will do that at some point, but that's like not what we do here. What we do here is we go through what is in the news, what stories are out there, and present them to you. And if you don't like them, your dislikes should be directed at the sources, not us. However, we need to move on because we do have one more little bit of Liverpool stuff. And that is the whole, will it be a big summer? Won't it be a big summer? Now, we've already kind of touched on this a bit, Dave, with the whole reference to the Joyce, the bit in the Joyce article about, the wages and, I said to you then, I sent you a little screenshot of a quote from Jonathan Northcroft article where, again, that was the sentiment was, this money outlaid on the two big superstars will probably mean that it's not going to be a big summer. And all of us, Dave, I think, to a man and woman, are of the opinion that it needs to be a big summer, not because we're ungrateful that the likelihood is we're going to win the Premier League for only the second time in 30 years, 35 years. It's not about that. It's about the fact that a blind man can see you bring in a new manager. He is going to want to build that squad. So a little bit of this was going to happen anyway. And then you have the inevitable lads who are on their way out. Darwin Núñez will not be at the club next season. I would say Luis Diaz will not be. I say there's a high likelihood that one of our big defenders will not be, if not two. And this is what we're talking about with the big summer thing. So between that Northcroft thing, but I know Jonathan Northcroft the article was more along the lines of as well of like, well, look, moves could happen, but there will have to be exits. Now, we're kind of firmly of the belief, you and I, that exits are a real thing that will be likely to happen. And we know that Liverpool don't like to spend money that isn't earned coming in the other way, right? We're all aware of the frugality. So let's talk big summer. What's your take on the big summer? Should people be tempering their expectations? And if we don't see an exit of note or several exits of note, should we contain our excitement in terms of incomings? Is that what we're getting?
It's a really tough one to answer this without sounding like a politician and playing both sides of the game, isn't it? But there's always, for me, there's the first bit is like, someone's big will never be big enough for someone else, won't it? If we spend 200 million, we should have spent 300. There's always going to be those people. There's also the element of people, the net spend needs to be massive, or the net spend needs to be 200, 300 million. Now, at real risk of making myself unpopular, and not that that's a real concern anyway, but just in terms of net spend, I thought we wanted all these geeks back in and the relevant nerds and the smart people in the room. So don't you want the net spend to be like as low as or smart, whatever you want to call it, as possible? Don't we mock other clubs when they spend like 700 million and still can't win the league? So there's that element to it for me. But I actually think if it's not, Trev, if it's not a lot of action in and out, there's an argument we're being gaslit a bit here. Because let's just be clear, this is a quote from Virgil van Dijk that's been released today. I think they're planning to make it a big summer. So we all have to trust the board as a Liverpool connected fan to do the right job. That's Virgil van Dijk saying big summer. Yeah. Fabrizio Romano, who I don't hold in the same accord as Virgil van Dijk, let's say that, has also said it's going to be a big summer. David Ornstein on CBS says Liverpool will be very busy in the market. Those were his words this summer, and spell out the departures that you talked about quite rightly. And he mentioned Canate, Nunes, Gomez, Kwanzaa, Elliott and Diaz. So David Ornstein was putting 6 names up potentially, as well as naming incomings there. That's important to say. Arne Slots. And I wanted to dig these out, as I told you earlier, to make sure it's like, okay, let's just check we're not misquoting people or there's something. Said the other day, we're definitely working on strengthening in the summer. Now, he didn't say big, and obviously, people interpret that, but we're definitely working on strengthening. All that combined with Virgil van Dijk's quote today, you could understand why people are expectant, can't you? Because if Van Dijk says it, Ornstein says it, Romano adds his snippet, Arne Slots mentions working on strengthening, has mentioned about that being the plan. We're hearing what we're hearing and all the various journos that are writing about it. It's right to have expectations, isn't it? It's also right, as you said, to put that context in. This is not Arne Slots' squad at all. There's quite a few players he clearly doesn't fancy and doesn't rate. We all know who they are. It's quite clear. We've seen the articles that the likes of Harvey Elliott for an offer is, we're open to offers for it and that type of situation. Darwin Nunes is gone. Luis Diaz likely. So you're right on all those things. So when you put that all together, that goes into the mix. Followed up by, I wondered when, I can't believe we've been doing this show for 34 minutes and that's the first slagging off of FSG we've had in the chat panel.
They've been skirting around it. They've been skirting around it. He's the first guy to use the phrase FSG.
Where have you been, people? What time is it type of thing? But we're finally there. So the FSG element and all there and the way people see it goes into the mix. But for me, like you, with the amount of outgoings, Arne Slots' first summer, the new structure in place, the aging out of players as well, players that are not wanted realistically by the head coach, I don't see how it could be a small summer, if you want me to put it that way. What I'll have no idea about, and this is where I think people will just be speculating, is what's the net spend, Trev? Because someone may say, the net spend's only 50 million or something like that. Okay. But if we sell 250 million quid's worth of players, that comes into the mix as well. But all this is now on the table because people need to be clear. It's not just all speculating, running away with it and all this. The skipper's mentioned it. The head coach has mentioned it. The big journalists have mentioned it. Everyone is using these types of phrases. So before everyone jumps on the, or you're just going to say things like war chest or massive spend and all this. We're just commenting on what is already out there.
And with the very clear proviso that you made of, if it doesn't happen, it will feel like we're being gaslit again.
Yeah.
So there is very much all of that into the, pardon me. Hopefully you couldn't hear that. I'm not sure if you could or not.
That'll be Michael Edwards saying, don't mention massive spend, no doubt, as well.
It's Big Mick Edwards saying, Trev, come on, lads, drive away from this topic. They're getting antsy in the comments. I wanted to just put a bit of context on this for people, because it's always wild to me when we start talking about this concept of the big summer. It's always wild to me how people just have this, like, it was apparent that people thought, well, Luis Diaz is not going anywhere, or Darwin Núñez is not going anywhere. But like, what are you watching? What have you not been paying attention? So what I wanted to do is just walk through the squad really quick with you. So we look at the goalkeepers. Alisson Becker, you and I both fear something possible there, because we've got obviously the big guy coming through. But this week there was stories about how he wouldn't mind staying on for another year, because the suggestion was that Alisson wasn't going anywhere for next season. This is all good. But Caoimhín Kelleher, straight up, is a guy who's up for sale. Defenders, Joe Gomez. I don't see any way that Joe stays around. I'd love him to, but I'm thinking if they're assessing the guy in terms of his availability and they're being ruthless, I don't see Joe staying. I hope he does, and I hope he plays loads of games for Liverpool, because I really like him. Ibu Kanate, there is a contract issue. Kostas Tsimikas will be starting to think, what's the point of this when he has a situation like he had on Sunday? Andy Robertson won't go anywhere until he's told that he'll be second choice. So who knows if that will happen? But Trent Alexander-Arnold is likely on his bike for free. Gerald Kwanzaa was one of the names you mentioned that Ornstein said. We've got good news around the Bradley contract, so that's something. Wataru Endo, beloved by Liverpool fans, but not beloved by the manager, has a tiny role that he gets played in on a semi-regular basis, and I don't know how happy he would be to continue in that next season. So Bosley, McAllister, Jones, and Gravenberch, they're the chosen ones. They're the four that we operate the three out of. Harvey Elliott's up for grabs, apparently, because he doesn't play. Tyler Morton's up for grabs.
Yeah.
Luis Diaz is up for grabs. Darwin Núñez is up for grabs. The only player signed on this manager's watch that makes it not just exclusively Jurgen Klopp squad is Fede Chiesa. He's got to be up for grabs because he doesn't play. And Diogo Jota is the guy who I think most people will say, oh, you just hold on to Jota. Fair enough. Fair enough. I get that.
Yeah.
And I'm very fond of all of these guys, but I also know how we operate. And if there's money to be made from him and we sign someone who's got the right numbers, so Dave, it amounts to a huge amount of potential activity. That's where the big thing comes from. And, you know, I don't think there's anything I've said there that's completely unreasonable, is there?
No, I think there'll be a few comments, like I'll put it on the screen there saying, Remster, the Kwanzaa stuff is honestly crazy to me. I get people will like players or they'll have the favourites or think they're a good player. But just take Kwanzaa as that example. I think it's very fair to mention it because Ornstein's name checked him. And also there was an article a couple of weeks ago in the Times that said Newcastle were looking at Jarell Quansah and Liverpool will sell for the right money. It was quite clear. There was prices and everything quoted. And if you're in any doubts of that name at all, how often has Jarell Quansah played this summer or this season? Sorry, just not, has he? He's clearly not particularly fancied by Arne Slots. I mean, he's only coming on now at emergency right back. Emergency right back. That's it. And in all honesty, you probably wonder if he hadn't have taken Curtis Jones off and made that switch, if he would have gone, you know, like Fulham a little bit in the Everton game. So there's just a lot of players that is quite clear Arne Slots doesn't fancy and links to that. There's no one that you mentioned there that I would go, hold on, they're staying, whatever. I just think we've got to start looking at this a bit differently. This is not it sounds horrible to say, but this is not the Jurgen Klopp era where everyone's in it together. There's a huge reluctance for anyone to depart almost and change it. I think it's looked at a bit differently. And honestly, all those names that you mentioned, I'm not saying we're going to sell the whole squad, people, but all those names you mentioned, Trev, it would not surprise me one bit if any of them moved on. Not at all.
And again, I don't know what version of reality you're in if you are going, oh no, that could never happen. Primarily just, again, the simple thing that this is a new guy and we've had almost a season's worth of tensions to build up and fellas to... Jan always says, the lads who weren't in the first team, they used to, like in training, they were referred to as the sour grapes, the guys who were grumbling and mumbling about everything. I'm not in the first year, and again, back then it was the first 11 or first 12 rather.
Yeah.
So it was a smaller little squad you could even be part of. And, don't tell me that's not building up with some of these guys who are not getting a chance. If you're Harvey Elliott, if you're Fede Chiesa, you got to be sick at the lack of opportunities.